Hello, my friends. I'm your host, Daniel Willcocks, and you're listening to episode number 23 of the Writer's Chair podcast. And it is Thursday, the 10th of June, 2026, as I record this. In today's show, I'm going to be talking to British horror author Dan Howarth about his recent nomination for Best Horror Novel from the British Fantasy Society, why traditional publishers should take the novella format seriously, the practical realities of self-publishing, and the screenwriting lesson that transformed the way that Dan approaches writing. Now, that's a real fun one. Dan's a personal friend of mine. We go into a lot of good stuff there. But before we get into all that, here is my personal update. So a few things on the go, a few things that listeners of the show will be aware of, but got some deadlines approaching, so figured I'd share those. The first one is that as of the time that this episode goes out, which will be Friday, the 12th of June, it will be 4 days until the Writers' Room opens. So for people not in the know, the Writers' Room is my live sprinting session. It's going to be happening every Tuesday evening. It is where writers jump on board, join me in a live online room, and we write our books together. And it is a lot of fun. We have dedicated writing sprints. So the whole setup of the Writers' Room is to have 5-10 minutes where people jump in. We chat, we catch up. If anyone's got any burning questions they want to ask me or just to ask the group to get a consensus, they can jump in, ask those. And then we hit our words for 20 to 30 minutes. I might decide how I feel on the day as to what the exact times are, depending on what the questions are. And then we have a break, and then we jump into another 20, 30 minutes of another session before we wrap up. So for me, it's a place that I am dedicating to work on a brand new book that I'm working on for everyone joining. And we've got people already filtering down now into my brand new Discord server in which people will be coming in. It's the place where you can chat with your other authors. It's where all the videos will be hosted, all the online video sprint stuff will be hosted. So if you want to find out more about that, all the information's over at danielwillcocks.com/the writers room. And that's Willcocks, WILLCOCKS, but there'll be a link in the show notes, so you don't need to worry. And then I've also got Hatching Season. So for anyone interested in writing dark fiction, writing some horror, some dark fantasy, some dark thriller, whatever takes your fancy, I am curating a horror anthology where all of the profits raised will go to the charity Mind, which is very, very fun for me. I am very, very excited to start reading these stories because we're getting into the hundreds and hundreds now. So start getting your stories in. The deadline for this is the 28th of June. So as of the time this airs, you'll have around 2 weeks if you want to put a story in. Stories between 2,500 words, 5,000 words, all themed around the theme of infestation. So the anthology is called Hatching Season. The theme is infestation. You can do bugs, you can do emotions, you can do aliens, you could do whatever you want. As long as it fits the theme of infestation, I want to hear your stories. So get them in at devilsrockbooks.com/submissions, which is my publishing company page where I put all my submissions and all the other books and stuff that I publish. So devilsrockbooks.com/submissions to get your story into Hatching Season. Deadline 28th of June. Do it. And then the only other thing to say really is I'm very much in a sort of, how to describe it, like a non-fiction-y season at the minute. I have a brand new book that will be coming out in a few months, which I haven't really mentioned too much about yet, but I will be in the coming weeks because that's getting closer to publishing form. And that book is designed to help people finish their first drafts, to improve their writing speed, and to commit themselves to writing challenges so that they can see their books out into the world. 4 years in the works, probably longer than that if you consider some of the other lessons, but generally I wrote the first draft of this book 4 years ago, and it's finally in a near publishable format. So look out for that. I'm also doing a revision of the self-publishing blueprint, bringing that onto the 2026 because that was written in 2021. So some of the advice in there is a little outdated, and I'm updating the references, I'm updating the links, the tools, all the knowledge you need to know for 2026. So keep an eye out for that because that's on its way soon. And then I'm also working on what will be a free 7-day course, which will be promoted through this podcast, in which I will be helping authors improve their writing speed, improve their mindset around writing. And it's my top tips on what I've learned over the past over a decade of publishing to get myself from struggling to finish a first draft, which I spanned my wheels for about a year on a novel that I got nowhere with. And I went from struggling writer to I've now got over 70 published works, over 50 short stories published with various publishers and things. So what were those lessons? You are welcome to find out when the course is done. That'll be done in the next couple of weeks. I'm hoping it'll be done by next week, but we'll see. Like, I can only do so much. So keep an eye out for that. But I'm enjoying kind of getting back into the thinking seat of trying to distill everything that I've learned and all the stuff I've done down into principles that help people, as you could probably tell from this podcast, as you can tell from the Writers' Room, as you can tell from, the course and everything else that's going on. I'm I'm enjoying it, to say the least. So, if you want any information on that or to find out any writerly resource and things that I've got going on, that's over at danielwillcocks.com. And there's a little For Writers tab near the top. So check that out. But now, without any further ado, I'm going to leave past Dan to speak to the other Dan in the interview that I conducted last week with Dan Howarth. As I say, Dan Howarth is a good friend of mine. He's a fantastic writer. He's been doing some amazing stuff. He is very, very central. He's a pillar of the horror society, particularly the UK Horror Society. And that's not a secret club. It's just a group. I'm babbling. Dan, if you listen to this, I love you. I really, really enjoyed this interview. I hope you will too. Now, if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's pull up a chair, grab a notepad, and let's get into it. What's up, Dan?
Good to see you, Dan.
Good to see you.
Yeah,
again,
how you doing?
Often, all the time. Dan Howarth is a British author of gritty northern weird horror fiction with a strong focus on societal issues and tinged with folklore on the supernatural and the supernatural. He is the author of Last Night of Freedom, Lionhearts, which was recently shortlisted for Best Novel in the 2026 British Fantasy Awards, Territory, and his latest novel, Drone, and the short story collection, Dark Missives. His short fiction has been published in numerous places, including Weird Horror Magazine, Chthonic Matter Quarterly, The Other Stories podcast, and Motives Unknown, New Northern Crime from Dead Ink Books. Dan, hello again.
And hello to you, sir. And thanks for...
T-shirt.
Pardon?
Are you wearing a Frank Turner T-shirt?
Of course. Yeah.
I saw the word Frank. I was instantly like, yes.
Yeah, oh yeah. Got to be done. Yeah, the man's a legend.
Oh, 100%. But welcome back to the show. We have had a few different episodes. We've had a few conversations on air over the last few years. And then obviously, most recently, I went and saw you over in Liverpool for the Indie Horror Chapter UK's event where you were selling all your books and things that we will no doubt get into. But for the people listening who might not know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're about, and the kind of things you're working
on? So, in terms of what I like to write, it's mostly horror or the horrific, I guess, really. I do have a short crime story on my list of credits, but I would say that was a horror story that snuck in as a crime story. I think I was, representing the genre undercover in that. Probably best known for at the moment, probably Last Night of Freedom, which was my book from 2024. Stag party, get hunted as you do. Only one of them get to go home alive. So, yeah, that's probably what I'm best known for. Things I like to talk about and write about, probably the North. Very much about that, it has to be said. And I don't know, I like to, write about men effectively and what bloody idiots they are. I just think that, we are quite a stupid species, and I'm grateful for that because it gives me a lot of fuel for my stories. So, yeah, I'd say there's probably the kernel of idiocy in every character I write because a lot of them are idiotic men.
Yeah. And it's something I do love about your work is that this kind of deep dive into the man side of stuff, the idiot side of stuff, into very, very British. Like I read a lot of horror these days. It tends to be mostly American horror. There's a lot of stuff set over there because obviously, it's a whole breadth of different landscape stories and things. But I feel like just in general, I've been missing reading about UK specific horror stories, British horror stories set in places that I'm familiar with that kind of very quintessentially British themes. You talk about Last Night of Freedom, which was one of my favorite books of 2024, is a stag party gone awry. And then your latest book, Drone, is about, a rural farmer and things that are happening on that island that I'm sure we'll go into. But what does it mean to you to kind of almost be doubling down on this British and specifically this Northern British type of horror?
I think a big part of it is like most of my ideas come from place quite often. I like to get out into nature, and I must admit I don't do it as much as I would like to do. But the amount of times I'm out somewhere, or you go on holiday, you go on a day out, and you just look around and think, this would be a great place to fictionally kill people. And to be honest, that's where a lot of it comes from. I recently delivered a class for one of Alex Davis's events online, and if you as the audience aren't familiar with Alex Davis's events that he does for Writing Magazine and he runs Edge Lit convention as well, which I would recommend. That they're all brilliant events. I was very flattered to be asked to take part in 2 of his folk horror events, and the things that I've focused on are right in location in folk horror and right in isolation. And I think they're both quite important elements of my stories, really. So, for example, Last Night of Freedom set in the Lake District, which most people will know as the kind of, all your popular tourist hotspots. But it's actually, Cumbria itself is actually quite a remote, quite a wild county. Once you get off the beaten track, there's plenty of opportunity to isolate people and therefore let a bit of horror in. Territory was set in a rural village in Finland near the Russian border. Again, the isolation. That's the kind of thing that I play on. And I think, the vast majority of what I write is British, largely because, it's the country where I live. It's not as simple as write what you know. I think it is a bit of write what you care about, almost. It's, I care about the North. I identify very strongly as being from here. I have some very staunch political views of, the North is not as well off as it should be. We are being neglected. It's probably my only staunch political view, but I think it's, it's a vital part of who I am. I was born in Manchester. I live near Liverpool. I spend most of my time up here. And the impact of the issues and the location, I think, has probably affected me more than I realised until I started writing. And those very British, very northern, stories started to come out, really.
So how do you write stuff that you know? And that sounds like a really sort of like crass question, but this is a thing that I've genuinely struggled with. I once had the opportunity to try and write an urban fantasy book set in Lincolnshire, which is where I used to live. And I personally really, really struggled. Most of my stories I tend to set in places that I'm not familiar with, because I find that when I try and write something that I know really, really well, I get really bogged down in the detail, like this has to be next to here or this road has to lead there. How do you approach writing those kind of stories and bringing the world that you know onto the page?
I think you have to be quite sparing with it, really. And I think this, a little detail can go a long way. A lot of the places that I've written, territory aside, because that is the anomaly, but I am very familiar with the vast majority of places that I've written about, and I think it can be as simple as one key killer detail. I must admit, I'm not a fan of books, and anybody who's read one of mine would probably, hopefully, agree that I don't fall into this category, but you don't need 2 pages to introduce a place. You can introduce a place with some well-chosen visual details or a sound or a scent, or if you're being really difficult on yourself, a taste. I think as long as you bring those places alive in a sensory way, you don't need to know how many houses are on a street, but you need to know, what the house that you're focusing on looks like, what it's set within. And I think if you probably can't do that within 5 or 6 lines or 2 paragraphs, you're overwriting, in my opinion. It's quite often I'll write half a page and it will end up as 1 paragraph once it's been edited. But sometimes you just get down all the details that are in your mind and then pare them back to, right, which ones are going to immediately get the reader into that particular location. And that's why I always try and focus on in an edit is to, right, how can I say the same amount, but with less words, fewer words? That's, right, okay. I mean, one thing that I did do that was really useful, so I've been on a couple of screenwriting courses at a local university, and one of the things that they do, and the tutor is brilliant, he's a professional screenwriter, and you send him your work, and then he'll put it up on the screen as like a Word doc, and everybody will critique it. And one of the things he'll do in your script is, say you've got a paragraph of like an action line that's like, say it's 5 lines. He'll say to you, right, you need to rewrite that as 2 lines. And you're like, but I need all that stuff. He's basically saying, say it quicker, say it better. And that is such a brutal but useful thing to think about. And quite often when I'm editing, I'll think, how would I be looking at this if it was up on the screen in that classroom?
Mm.
And that really helps. So yeah, that's been a big lesson really from a different discipline that I think that's stuck with me now for quite some time really.
Well, it's efficiency, isn't it? It's efficiency of narrative and trying to keep the plot driving. And from what I've read of your work so far, and I mean, I've tackled Drone, I've tackled Last Night of Freedom, I haven't gotten to Lionheart yet. But from what I've seen of your writing, it is very propulsive. It does keep moving forward, which is something that I do find in a fair bit of indie work, particularly, that there are sort of moments where things drag and you do get bogged down in the details. I'm probably the same because I get very purple with my writing, but I love that stuff. But yeah, Last Night of Freedom is very, very go, go, go. Drone, very similar, go, 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 go. What you mentioned about the fact that, you know, your focus is on sort of Northern British people, and looking at Last Night of Freedom as a perfect example. One of the things that I loved about that book was the fact that, you know, I listened to the audiobook of that as well, and it was just very, very voicey, and it was very authentic to that experience. Like I've read where people have spoken about Troops of Guys before, and it's felt very sort of inauthentically laddish, but you kind of really managed to nail what it is like to be on a stag do out in the middle of nowhere and to have these kind of clashing cultures. And obviously I won't say much of what happens. How do you work on the craft of voice and making sure that, you know, it comes across on the page in a way that is both narratively engaging, but also reflective of what you're trying to achieve?
I think the thing with Last Night of Freedom that was really difficult was you had four guys who were all similar of age and know each other. So, you know, everybody gets a perspective chapter, and it was how do you make those different? And that was quite tricky, to be honest. I mean, ultimately, and I will never reveal who, but all of the characters are based on people I have known, basically. Most of them I don't see anymore, to
Well,
be
I know
fair.
which one I am.
Yeah, you're one of the people who are hunting them down with a shotgun, Dan. I know your reputation. You're so nice and affable on your podcasts, you know,
But
but the rest
it's
of the
all
time,
masked.
oh, absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think I held that in my mind. And again, I mean, one of the things that I always try and do is do like a character pass on a draft. So do a plot pass where you think, right, does everything make sense? Have I joined all the dots in the plot? Have I, most importantly, in a lot of cases, because I kind of work with a lot of isolation, have I closed all the loopholes for people to escape? That's like the key thing, really, is, you know, have I tightened everything enough so that the tension that I want is within the story? But then you do a character pass of, right, okay, so you say you've got two main characters, you do one pass where you look at the first main character, right? How does he speak? Is it consistent all the way through? How does he act? How does he react? Okay, right, fine, we've got that consistent. Then you go into the next pass. Okay, how does she speak? How does she react? Who does she, you know, respond to? And all those kind of things. So I think it's just trying in the edit, and it's, you know, might not always be successful, but it's certainly a conscious effort to try and ensure that there's consistency of character throughout. And, you know, just ensure that, you know, you're being as true to how you see that character within the story, within that situation as possible. And yeah, and as consistent really, because nothing throws you out of the story of, well, hold on, she's always done X, Y, and Z, but now she's, you know, done this, you know, oh, what? You know, it's that kind of change of character. You look at like, you know, Game of Thrones gets slammed a lot, doesn't it? You know, because
Yeah.
the last few series, they kind of rushed some of that character development, and, you know, people were unhappy with that. And yeah, it can cheapen what you've worked so hard on if you don't stay consistent throughout. So yeah, it is a constant, something that's on my mind and try and focus on, particularly in the edit, really.
Yeah. And you've written novellas, you've written short stories, you've written novels. You put a lot of the books out under your own press, Northern Republic Press, over the last few years. How have you found your process does it change much between sort of writing a novella versus a novel, or is it kind of similar and it's just, you know, how many words you put on the page that affects the end result?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I would say that probably the most fun I've had is writing the novellas, and I don't know why, but there's something about that form. Like, you know, somebody, you want to sit down and read a 600-page book, that's fine. But I think I would probably sit down and read, I'd give me 6 novellas rather than a 600-page book. There's just something about that particular length of story that just as a reader and a writer appeals to me. But I think both times I've managed it with Territory and with Drone, I didn't set out to write novellas specifically. Territory was originally a 4,000 word short story, and there was a really key scene in it. So there's a scene that I love whereby the townsfolk are having an argument basically amongst themselves, big debate as to how they're going to handle the situation with the wolves. And they always say, kill your darlings. Well, I couldn't kill that scene. It was too important to the plot, and it was too much fun to write. It wouldn't fit in the 4,000 word short story. So I was like, right, do you know what? I'm just going to write this how I want to write it, and we'll see where it came out. And it came out about 30,000 words in the end. And that gave me the chance to expand out some of the other characters, some of the side characters a bit, and make the world a bit more involved as well. And the same with Drone. Like I was stuck on a novel about this time last year. We were kind of due to move house, and I just couldn't get this book to work, couldn't get the ending to work. And it was really hot, and like we had all the house admin and all that kind of stuff. And it was just, it was borderline, nervous breakdown, chuck your computer out the window territory. And I spoke to Gemma Moore, who was my writing mentor at the time. And she said, well, if it's doing your head in like this, why don't you just write something else? Just write anything else. She's like, you're not under contract. Just write what you want to write. So I kind of had this idea for Drone, sat down, thought, oh yeah, just bang out a quick short story. And then kind of, I think it was 7 to 10 days later, 26,000 words, it's finished. So, I've never really sat down to worry about the story length. But yeah, two of the more organic books that I've written, two of my favourite books, I think, have ended up being the novellas, which, I don't know, like I say, it's just perfect length, really. Just love that.
I gotta say, I do love the novella length. I wonder if there is something being missed in the conversation about the fact that novellas are a great way for author discovery. Like some of the best authors that I found recently have had sort of shorter length novellas, like Cassandra Core's one of them, T. Kingfisher, those kind of people. They have these shorter works that I'm like, if they had just had novels, I might have been less inclined to go into them. Because like you say, novels obviously like a much more comprehensive, in-depth experience. It takes longer to read, and there's space for that. And I love reading a good novel, but every now and then it's just like, I just need a palate cleanser. Like I'm about to the next book I pick up is going to be Rosemary's Baby, because I think that's only about 130 pages or something. It's not huge.
Oh yeah, it's not a long book, that.
Yeah. And so I wonder if there's something missing in that conversation. But I also think that within the independent publishing space, I think you have the chance to write out of form. You have the chance not to worry about, a book must be X, a book must have X, Y, Z. And you can be a bit more experimental and just have fun with it. And one of the things I've always liked about you is you seem very well connected. A lot of people in particularly the horror space, whether they're sort of, traditionally published or self-published or whatever. How do you think that kind of approach to writing books shifts between independent versus traditional?
To be honest, I think that traditional presses are missing a trick by willfully excluding novellas. I just see them as so popular within horror. You look at I've read some absolutely brilliant novellas. One of my favourites
Books, yeah,
is The Visible Filth, which Nathan Ballingrud wrote and was published originally by This Is Horror. And I can remember exactly where I was because, I kind of helped Michael Wilson out with the editing of that book. I can remember it arriving. I sat down and read it like all in one sitting. And I remember finishing it, and I can distinctly remember where I was. I just remember thinking like, oh my God, I feel like somebody's just punched me in the stomach. Like it was like the whole world was ripped out of me by the end of it. And eventually, it got picked up and it was kind of wrapped up in a bigger collection, which is fine. But I feel that putting it in a collection has kind of robbed it a bit of its punch. And as paper costs get more expensive, and I just wonder whether there's more room for novellas. Attention spans are shorter, so yeah, I think it's the perfect length and the perfect form. But I guess if you're trying to, it's like you say, it's a perfect introduction to a writer. So I don't know. I just feel like people should be looking at these a bit more. I've forgotten what the question is. I've gone on my novella pedestal now.
No,
But
that's what the question was. It was sort of that kind of attitude between traditional publishing and independent publishing around the novella. Because I'm similar. Like I've got, as you know, I've got a couple of novellas in the works at the minute. One that's closer to being published than the other. And there is something, as a writer, it's satisfying because it obviously goes beyond the short story and it gives you that sort of creative freedom to develop an idea. And I've had a novella turn into a novel before, but then I've had a novel turn into a novella. Um, but then as a reader, again, like that introduction, like a nice sort of quicker, like palate cleanser type thing. And some of, there are some incredible classic novellas out there. Like I remember when I Am Legend was first brought to the screen with the Will Smith one, they had a deal on wherever I bought it from where you got the book for £1 extra as like part of this bundle. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know there was a book. Got that through. And that's, again, like probably about 100 pages, if that. Like that's novella length.
Yeah.
So, all of this is kind of being missed out of that bigger conversation, I feel.
Yeah, and I think you look at like Eric LaRocca, for example. Things Have Gotten Worse. Is a classic example of that. Sold thousands and thousands of copies before, he got his representation, and he became the household name that we all know and love now. Like, that's where he cut his teeth, and still one of his strongest, stories. It is a really good gateway, to be honest. And I think if you as a reader could go into, Waterstones, for example, and you could see, oh, here's a novella by X person for like a fiver,
Yeah.
rather than here's your 10.99 or here's your 20 quid for your hardback.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just feel like it could really tempt people in.
Imagine how crammed those bookshelves will be as well.
Yeah, what, with all those novellas?
Yeah,
about 1,000 novellas in one shelf.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think that they're great. I think they're a great gateway. And to be honest, when I get an idea, I always kind of think, oh, does this have the legs to be a novel? And the fact that being an indie means that you can do what you want. It means that I don't have to worry about whether it's 30,000 words or whether it's 70. Because, how many times have we all read a book and thought, if that was 40,000 words, that would have been 40,000 words of perfection, rather than 70 odd thousand words where you think, I can't wait for the next good bit to come along. We've all seen those kind of books, and I don't know. I guess I'm just a fan of getting to the point, maybe.
He says in his ramble.
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Brought it around to the point in the end. But yeah, with a book, just tell it to me straight, man. Come on.
Yeah, for sure. And I've totally lost the direction of my question. Where was I going to go with that? Yes. So so on the indie publishing route, you in my conversations with you, you obviously were one of the former hosts and involved with This Is Horror. You've been in the community for a long time. You've been working on words for a long time. You've been writing short stories for a long time. And then a couple of years ago, you took this decision. You made the decision to start publishing things through Northern Republic Press and to start independently publishing your own work. Now that you're, I'd say, 3 or 4 years on from that initial decision, how have you found your journey into self-publishing, running a press? How have you found that?
It's good. I must admit, I don't always see myself as a details person. Like, I'm not particularly good with numbers. I think it's challenged me in a lot of ways, really. It's, doing those double checks on formatting and grammar and spelling and all that kind of stuff. Like, I wouldn't put something out without it being proofread by somebody else, just because I just don't think it's my strong suit. And I think it's really important that, we all have access to a lot of resources as self-publishers and indie publishers. To my mind, there's no excuse for your book not to look professional these days. Be it, you're doing it yourself, you're doing it with others, you're doing it for a small indie press. I just don't think there's any excuses anymore. And I always strive to make sure that my books are as professional on the inside and the outside as they possibly can be. So I think some of it is about making good connections with people. I've got a good proofreader who I trust, Vicky Brewster. She does great work at good prices, and would totally recommend her. And likewise with Paul Stevenson of Hollow Stone Press, who does my covers. Working with him, we've worked specifically together to try and create a brand so that, the novels all look broadly similar, even though they're not a story, a series of stories. You can tell that they're all the same author just by looking at them. And likewise, the novella covers are always going to be unique. They won't come into the same kind of template of covers as the novels, but there is a consistency of approach there that I think does help. It gives you that kind of brand, and you can put yourself over however you want to put yourself over. You're not beholden to anybody else. So I would say that making those connections and finding good people that you can work with is important. Yeah, there are financial barriers to it. Having your work proofread professionally. I've said that Vicky does good work at good prices, but it doesn't mean that it's free. Nobody should work for free, and nor should they. It's you've still got to find the money, but it's I don't have that many hobbies, if I'm totally honest. This is
my entire hobby.
Yeah, I don't go to the gym, so as you can probably tell. So I save that money and I invest it into things that are important to me. And if that's putting a few £100 aside for proofreading or covers or whatever it may be that I need to make the book as good as it can be, then it's, to my mind, it's money well spent. And I must admit, I'm not financially orientated when it comes to the books. Like, it's brilliant that they sell, and please, by all means, go out and buy every fucking book that I put out, please. But what I would say is, I don't see it as a loss leader. I don't ever kind of go out chasing cash and profit with it. I do it because I love it, and being able to write the books is a privilege. Being able to afford to publish them is a privilege too. But it comes with the responsibility of making sure that it is as good as it can be. And as long as I'm happy with that, I'm happy no matter what happens once the book comes out. It's, the end goal is the publication. Anything beyond that is a bonus, really. And for that reason, I'm usually pretty happy with how they turn out.
Yeah. I think that's a really good attitude to adopt, something that I know that I personally sort of forget now and then. It's easy to get lost in the wave of people who are like doing smash success stuff, or and all these different hacks and ways to sell your book online, and a lot of them don't work for most people. But the bottom line is that we spend sort of hours sat in a room writing these things, working on these things, and to get to that point where it's published and just be like, yeah, I've done it. That's a nice place to be. Are you still pursuing anything sort of traditional at the minute, or are you very much staunchly, I'm writing my books and I'm putting them out, and that's kind of where your focus is?
It depends, I think, is the answer, really. Not everything is a commercial project, I don't think. If the right opportunity came up for representation of any kind, really, you have to consider it. I mean, the thing that I struggle with is, you see your books and, they look good and they read well. It's the distribution that you can't get as an indie. It's so difficult to get your book on shelves, and that is ultimately what I would want to see out of my writing career. One day, just to walk into a Waterstones and go, "There's my book," and I know
where we're like, "Oh no, I'm not bothered about that." There's that tiny part in the back.
Yeah, there is a tiny part of it.
That'd be nice.
And part of you does want that, but then at the same time, I'm not under contract. I'm not under pressure. I'm not, I saw a post recently by a thriller author who's published 14 books, and she's had only 5 of them had the title that she gave it. The publishers have changed the titles on, however many of her books and all that kind of stuff. And you just think, obviously it's great that you can go in a supermarket or a bookshop or whatever and see your book, but I'm also doing this because I love doing it. And at the moment, I'm making all my own decisions. My wife has often said I don't play well with others anyway. So maybe just as I'm learning, right now, maybe I'm in the right place because, got good creative control. I've got good people helping in terms of the covers and stuff. So yeah, the books look good. Hopefully they read well. Yeah, we're fine as we are. But, you know, to all the agents listening, I am a commercially viable property.
Yeah.
By all means, snap me up. It's fine.
I'm available.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the biggest lessons you've kind of taken over the last few years of publishing your own books? Like, if you think back to sort of the cusp of publishing territory to now, what the sort of, if you can go back and speak to yourself back then, what would you tell yourself?
I think the one thing that I would really look at is that identity and that consistent kind of branding. And I think probably understanding who I am and what I am as a writer has become really important to me. So the book that we haven't mentioned is Dark Missives, which is a short story collection. That was my first book. And I had a different artist for that, and he's done a good job on the cover. But when you put the books all out next to each other, you know, you do a con or whatever, and people go, "Oh, this one looks a bit different. It's just got a different style to it." And I think that once I started working with Paul on Territory, and we kind of clicked in terms of, you know, I can do a really shit drawing of what I want it to be, and he will go away and go, "Do you mean like that?" And it's almost like perfect every single time. So yeah, I think that kind of understanding who you are and where you want to go and what you stand for as a writer or an artist, I think is really important. And I don't think I thought about that properly until I was probably 3 or 4 books in. And I was lucky in that there was consistency between Territory, Last Night of Freedom, Lion Hearts, and now Drone with the art. There's consistency of theme of everything that I've written, but just the way it's packaged. And, you know, I think Dark Missives are probably, it needs bringing into line, really. It needs to be brought into the brand, I think, to make it consistent. Again, it's money, though, because, you know, I'll need money for a new cover soon, and I don't want to spend money on an old book. So, you know, so it's one of those. But I would say that identifying what you stand for, who you are, what you're writing about, who you're writing for, is really important. And I think I'm well and truly on top of that now. But it has taken me a couple of years to understand that, really.
Yeah. I got to say, it was really nice when I did go to the indie horror chapter event. I always forget the actual proper name of it. And I pulled up, and obviously I stayed with you that night. So I spent a lot of time at your table. But when I first arrived, and there was the Northern Republic banner, and there was all your books and stuff lined up and just out on the table, you can kind of, there were a few authors there, and this isn't to sort of disparage those authors, but there are a few authors there that obviously you can tell it's kind of passion, and they just different covers for different things. But there was a real unity in your table and the images and the identity and stuff. And it was just really, really nice to see, having known your journey and get to that point. And then obviously having people come up to the table and being your wingman was fun. So thank you for that opportunity.
Yeah, no worries, and thanks for the help. You know, can't stand there all day. Got to go and get a drink sooner or later. But yeah, so you filled in nicely for that. So thanks very much.
Yeah.
And thanks for doing it for free as well. Margins are tight.
Yeah.
No, but no, you're right. It is about, you know, every book represents you, and I want them all to consistently speak in the same way, you know, and that give them the opportunity to speak for themselves whilst being part of the larger representation. I mean, I make no bones about it. I'm not a brand or a marketing expert. In fact, I would argue I'm probably closer to terrible than to good when it comes to marketing. But I have started to understand what it means to be consistent with your brand. And people look at that as like a dirty word, and I suppose, you know, within creative industries. And I just can't think of a better word for it. Your identity, perhaps. But that is important. You know, there are a whole bunch of writers out there where you pick up their books and you think, I know exactly what I'm going to get here. Like, and that can be reassuring. People like that. You know, they know who this writer is. They know what they stand for. You know, and that consistency is fantastic to have, and it's something that I'll strive to maintain, really, because at the moment it seems to be working.
Yeah. Well, it seems to be, and you know, we'd be remiss if we kind of finish this conversation without noting the fact that you are now shortlisted for a British Fantasy Award for Best Novel. So tell us a little bit about how you're feeling about that, how that came about, what it was like to hear that news.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I was not expecting it with Lionhearts. I must admit, I really, really wanted it for Last Night of Freedom. I just felt that that book spoke so strongly for who I was. And it didn't make the shortlist last year. It was, every year it's a very strong shortlist for best horror novel. And to be honest, I just didn't see it coming this year for Lionhearts, and that's not because I don't believe in the book, and I absolutely do. And I look at that book now and think that was like a leap book for me. I don't know if you've ever kind of felt that about yourself when you write a book and you think, God, I've unlocked something there. I feel like I've stepped up a level, really.
I'm on that with my next one.
Yeah, and it's like Lionheart's felt like that for me. It's a raw book. It's written from a wound. It's yeah, it is. It's written from a wound, and it's a wound that's open in this country. You see people bloody tearing the towns apart or whatever. In the news recently. Those wounds are open in the country, and it's not a supernatural novel in any way, but it is a horrible novel. It is a horror book because we're all living through the horror of, far right dickheads trying to take over our news and our culture. So yeah, I didn't see it coming. So it was, yeah, really staggered me. It's a book that I'm really proud of. It's done well for me in other things. It's nearly got me an agent on 2 or 3 occasions, but not quite got over the line. It's come runner up in a couple of other competitions in the past. Yeah, it's been my very nearly book. And maybe who knows, maybe it'll be the book that gets over the line and wins. I don't know. The competition is insanely strong. There's some fantastic writers on that shortlist. But I look at Lionhearts and think, do you know what? This book deserves it because it's probably my red-headed stepchild of a book. It's the one that I didn't really know what to do with. It's not firmly horror. It's not firmly crime. It's just a nasty, nasty piece of work. But it is a book I'm proud of. And I think it's taken me a while to be able to say that because the subject matter is pretty hard to deal with.
Yeah. And I guess, kind of tying all the knots of the theme of this conversation, like it's a perfect example of where indie can thrive because, you've got a book that is on the fringes and it is a genre mash of different things. It's not a traditional book that you potentially, see on, the shelves of Waterstones amongst all the others that are a bit more sort of mainstream trending. And yet you put out this book and it's hit quite a big potential award, which is kind of a huge thing. And even if you don't win, I don't think I've actually said this face to face to you yet, but like massive congratulations, man. Like super
Thanks, mate.
proud of you. Like it's really really nice to see.
Cheers. Yeah, I've been working hard, and like I say, that was a book that took its toll on me for a long time. That book, so to see it doing well is gratifying. It makes me think that all that misery that it caused me, like doing the research and stuff, was not in vain.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's good, and we'll see where it gets to. But I mean, it's up against the Buffalo Hunter, which is a phenomenal piece of work. So it may well get slapped aside, but hey, it's on the list.
Yeah,
can't argue with that. So
absolutely,
it's got a chance.
There we go. And we are unfortunately coming close to time, but I have one question for you before we go into our quick fire round, which I think you should be familiar with. I think we've done a quick fire round before. But that question is basically, what is next for you, Dan Howarth? What are you working on at the minute? What does the next sort of year look like for you?
So, always working on lots, really, to be honest. So, obviously, Drone came out in April this year, so that's great to have it out there. Seems to be doing well with readers and all that kind of stuff. And, still seeing it pop up with reviews online and all that kind of thing.
I need to leave my review because I genuinely really, really enjoyed this.
Yeah, please do, mate. They're all appreciated because, it raises the profile of the book, the more reviews we have and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, if you get the chance, but, still getting tagged on socials of people who are reading it and stuff, which is really cool. Beyond that, I've got another novella ready to go. Mostly, I think there's no cover, but the story is there. So that might be later this year. I've got a book, The Beacons, which I'm tweaking. So that's a novel. Got a couple of others. Yeah, I mean, there'll probably be another book this year. I don't know which one it'll be yet, but we'll see. And then beyond that, yeah, probably got another 4 or 5 lined up. It's just really busy. Like,
Always have time.
yeah, exactly. You just got to keep moving forwards, So, yeah, it's all good.
Beautifully put. Okay, we are going to head into our quick fire round now. So I've got 10 questions I'm going to throw at you as quickly as possible. As I say to nearly everyone I speak to, you can't be worse than Michael David Wilson at this. So
Well, yeah, I'll give you that one.
he's a talker, but we love him. Okay, so are you ready?
Yeah.
Question 1. What's the first thing you do when you wake up?
Oh shit, I gotta go to work.
What's your favorite horror film of all time?
Favorite horror film of all time? Bloody hell, what a question. Do you know what? I'm probably going to say Kill List.
Okay, not seen that one yet. Would you rather fight 100 duck-sized horses or 1 horse-sized duck?
1 horse-sized duck.
What was your dream job as a kid?
I think to be a footballer, but I also used to say I wanted to be a milkman.
Right, we might.
I don't know why either.
We might come back to that. What is your current earworm bop?
I would say anything by Brian Fallon.
Nice. The zombie apocalypse strikes. What is the first shop you hit?
Costco, obviously.
What's your favourite city?
Manchester.
What's your worst habit?
God knows. Probably just annoying my wife constantly.
What time are you most creative?
Early in the morning, but it never used to be that way.
What one book would you recommend above all others, excluding your own?
I would recommend Kill Your Friends by John Niven. Hilarious and bleak as fuck.
Fantastic. And bonus question, where can my listeners find out all about yourself and everything you've got going on?
So you can find out about me on my website, danhowarthwriter.com, but you can also find me as danhowarth20 on most social media platforms.
Perfect. And that is a wrap. So thank you so much, Dan, for coming on the show and spending some time with us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
No worries. And to everyone listening, thank you for being here. If today's conversation sparks something inside you, then go and do something with it. That's the whole point. And if you want to go deeper, whether that's with your writing, your process, or actually finishing your book, head over to danielwillcocks.com/writers. There's a growing list of resources for you over there. Until next time, write bravely and dream big. Thanks again, Dan.
Cheers.